Hi, Claudine.
Hello. Hi.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really interested to get your take on this month's LREF Insights theme, which is net zero. And specifically, we're going to be talking about Brent Cross Town, which is one of the largest regeneration schemes in London right now, with nearly 7,000 homes and 50 acres of parks and playing fields. And I believe you started on site this year.
Yes, we did.
So can you tell me a bit about what your ambitions are for this project in terms of net zero?
Yeah, sure. I'll give you a few broader ambitions first before we dive into the net zero, because I think it's really important. So Brent Cross Town is going to be the place in London to participate in sport and play, which really brings out that health and well-being agenda. It will be a new North London town where everyone's going to flourish. We are developing a flourishing index, working with Manchester University and Buro Happold. And then, of course, it's going to be that net zero town where we'll be driving down embodied carbon, we'll be driving down operational carbon, and then whatever's left, we'll need to offset.
Specifically when it comes to embodied carbon, can you tell me a bit more about your strategies specifically for reducing embodied carbon in the scheme?
First of all, embodied carbon is the biggest material issue when it comes to carbon in developments. So that leads us to be able to come up with some sort of strategy to reduce that, because if we don't do that and just stick with the operational, that's not going to make us a net zero town. So what we are going to do is try and use less materials to begin with. So really clever designing with our architects, both in the buildings and in the public realm. Reducing the carbon content of materials, for example, concrete, increasing the recycled content of materials, such as within steel, using renewable materials like timber, and then in the carbon content of all materials, we're going to really scrutinize this through doing life cycle analysis. So we understand the carbon life cycle of the whole thing, which will take into account thinking about when it comes to refurbishments, what happens then, how have we designed to make that easy, less material intensive, and then also right at the end of the life of the building so that we can disassemble the building as opposed to and be able to recycle those materials as opposed to demolish the building.
And it must be great being able to come in right at the beginning of the project like this, so that you can kind of set out your roadmap from the word go.
Absolutely.
And, could you tell me a bit about your strategy around energy and providing energy to the scheme?
So we're working with Vattenfall on the heat element. So we're going to have district heating and local heating, which actually is a fantastic strategy, because that will help us with the operational element of the carbon and driving that down. We're also going to be working to bring in electricity that will be from renewable sources. It won't necessarily all be on site, but it will be private purchase agreements so that we can drive that renewable energy and the carbon out. The grid will decarbonise as we go, and this is a long-term project, so we have to keep checking in on that and making sure that we're doing this in a very efficient way.
And speaking of long-term projects and targets, the government has set targets for 2050. I believe you're going earlier than that with 2030. What's your kind of thinking there?
We know there's climate emergency, and climate emergency isn't in 2050, it's now. So we need to do something about that now. And we've said we will be net zero carbon at the latest by 2030, because we believe that we have to do something and we have to do it now.
That's great. And you're not alone. I think there's other people who are really striving for that earlier target, which is amazing. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is effective carbon offsetting, and what your approach is around that, and what you think the real estate industry can do. How can we do more on this front? How can we do better?
So I think offsetting has a place in terms of global carbon reductions. Basically, it's providing capital and finance to projects that wouldn't normally be carried out if it wasn't for this money that was being paid. It's all about making sure you're buying the right offsets from the right projects. And there are 2 schemes and 2 certifiers who do audits and make sure all the certificates in the voluntary market are legitimate and they are reducing those carbon emissions. And that's the gold standard and the VCS. I think the other thing, if I give you a couple of examples of offsets that I've bought before in another organisation, in another life, around, so stoves, for example, that help cook in India and Africa and various places, people who don't have access to heating to cook their food. Some of the certificates help them buy those. Now, they reduce carbon emissions because what they were using before was very carbon intensive to do that. So that doesn't just have carbon reduction benefits, it also has social benefits, which is fantastic. Another project we invested in, not Argent, but I was at EasyJet, was a borehole project where water was taken for communities from a borehole, as opposed to going to get it from a river, bringing it and boiling it, which meant you're saving the carbon and not boiling the water. And then really importantly, there are projects called REDD+ projects, which are about actually protecting forests so that forests won't be cut down by the community that live in them. The reason they cut them down is because they need the wood in order to be able to sell that and to survive. But some of these projects, the money goes towards giving them other ways of increasing their economic value, farming and so on, and they don't cut those trees down. So if it wasn't for all these projects and people paying for these offsets, they wouldn't happen.
So there's lots of opportunities out there to get creative when thinking about offsetting. And do you think there are any issues around standardization on this front across the industry?
I think so. UK GBC are already looking at ways of defining a framework to show this is how we should do offsetting in our sector. I think that would be really helpful. But you know, that there are lots of, as I say, sort of certification bodies that are doing a lot of work around this. And I wouldn't hesitate to go out and buy offsets from them, because I know that those bits of carbon are being saved, and it's not. I know offsetting hasn't had a great reputation, but it would help for UK GBC to do this framework.
And you touched just then on a couple of projects from past roles that you've had, and you've worked at a number of organisations across a number of different sectors, Sainsbury's, EasyJet, Honda, to name a few. Do you have any other learnings from those sectors? What can the built environment industry learn from what's going on in other sectors?
I had to think about this yesterday, and I think it's all about research and development and more innovation. I don't think our sector has really been on the forefront in terms of innovating, and we are going to see some disruption come our way. We're already starting to see it through COVID, where people want to work in a different way. They want to shop in a different way. And what does that mean for our sector? So I think we need to really innovate. We need to be at the forefront of trialing things, failing quickly and moving on, and being able to offer a resilient sector for now and in the future. But I really don't think we can do that without some proper R&D and innovation.
Well, that's a nice positive ambition to wrap up on, and nice to think that out of this crisis has come an opportunity for more innovation, which is always a good thing. Claudine, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Amy.
It's been great speaking with you. Good luck with everything.
Thank you. You too.